The cushion on that old studio stool still held the warmth like it hadn't let go of me yet. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something I wasn't supposed to remember. I didn't step back. I inhaled the room like it was mine. That space between our fingertips, unclosed, felt more permanent than a name. I wasn't stolen. I stayed because I finally recognized myself. The first thing I noticed was how the light had changed. It poured through the tall windows of his studio, not in beams, but in a kind of hush, muted, warm, deliberate. The kind of light that softened outlines and made everything feel half-remembered. Daniel moved through it like he belonged there, all quiet shoulders and stillness, adjusting the angle of a lamp with fingers that didn't rush. I hadn't planned to be there. It was supposed to be a quick drop-off, some old prints he'd found from the wedding years ago. He called, said he had them if I wanted to stop by, no pressure. I said yes too easily. The studio smelled like dust and lavender and faintly of something smoky, wood varnish maybe or time. There were canvases leaning against the walls, a teacup forgotten on a stool, and one chair in the center of the room. Not quite facing the light. Not quite turned away. Sit wherever, he said. So I did. I told myself it wasn't strange, that it was just two people who once knew each other better than they do now. But there was something in the way the silence stretched. A pause that didn't beg to be filled, only watched. He adjusted the lens. You still tilt your head the same way, he said. I smiled but didn't answer. I felt the memory before I could remember the moment. He didn't ask me to pose. He didn't ask anything. The shutter clicked. Once. Again. Then again. Each time it did, I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatically, not like a breaking, but more like a breath held too long that finally found its way out. I sat there, hands in my lap, not looking at him but not looking away either. The light moved. His shadow crossed mine. There was a moment, barely a moment, when he stood too near, adjusting something invisible, and his hand hovered near mine. Not touching. Not intending to. Just near. My fingers curled tighter on instinct. Then didn't. The sound of the lens refocusing was louder than it needed to be. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just noticed it more because everything else had gone quiet. My thoughts, my defenses, the voice in my head that always said, careful. He didn't cross the line. But I felt something in me take a step. When I stood to leave, I paused. Not because I forgot something. Not because he asked me to stay. But because the cushion was still warm, and I wasn't ready to stop feeling it. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of what happened but because of what almost did. And the way it made me feel seen, unsettled, and somehow remembered. I began walking past his studio again. Not every day. Just often enough to make it feel unintentional. I told myself it was the long way home, that the market nearby had better produce, that the curve of that street simply made more sense. But the truth was quieter. It moved beneath language. Sometimes the curtains were open. Sometimes not. Sometimes I'd catch the faint outline of his shoulder bent toward a canvas, or the glint of a lamp reflecting off glass. Once I heard jazz playing, something old brushed with static. I stopped mid-step and stood outside longer than anyone passing by would have considered normal. He never looked up. Or maybe he did. But the glass reflected more sky than interior, and I let that be the reason I kept walking. At home, small things began to shift. I started setting the table with cloth napkins again. Not for guests. Just because. I brewed tea in the good pot, the one we got from Lisbon and rarely used. I opened the windows wider. Let air in, even when it made the room colder than necessary. One afternoon, a small envelope appeared in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. The chair. The light. The same composition but empty this time. And yet it didn't feel unoccupied. It felt suspended. I placed the photo on the windowsill above the sink. I didn't frame it. I didn't hide it either. It just stayed there like a note I hadn't finished reading. When I passed mirrors, I stopped more often. Not to fix anything. Just to look. I tilted my head. I hadn't realized how often I'd started doing that. Until I caught myself doing it again. The same tilt he once mentioned. I put on lipstick before grocery runs. Nothing bold. Just enough to feel like I remembered something about myself I'd once known well. I wore my scarf in a different way, tied off-center. Not for anyone. And yet I noticed the way the silk caught the light in the rearview mirror. The distance between us didn't close. But it changed shape. It wasn't physical anymore. It was stitched into the way my breath paused when I heard a shudder in a commercial. The way my hand hovered over the envelope drawer, wondering if I'd write him back. It was in the silence between my questions. The space after what if, before never mind. One morning I lingered outside the studio again. The blinds were down but light seeped through the sides, soft, golden, tentative. I didn't knock. But I didn't move either. And in that moment I realized, I had memorized the weight of the air between us. And I was beginning to want it closer. There was something about the way the studio light tilted that evening, off-center, like it had changed its mind about what should be illuminated. It struck only half of his cheek, the rest left to shadow, and for a moment, I wasn't sure which version of him I was drawn to more. I shouldn't have come back. That much I told myself, standing by the frame of the door, watching his hands adjust the same lens he'd used on me the week before. The lens wasn't even on the camera, just turning in his fingers. Slow. Intentional. As if the silence needed something to move. He didn't look up, not right away. But he knew I was there. Our silences had grown so familiar they'd started speaking for us. And still I stepped in. Closed the door. The soft click behind me sounded louder than it should have, like punctuation on something I hadn't named yet. The cushion on the stool was warm again. Not from me, but as if it remembered. I didn't sit. I just let my hand hover above it, not quite touching. My skin reacting to a heat it technically wasn't in contact with. His voice, when it came, was lower than I remembered. You don't have to say anything. I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes trace the room. The shutter cord still knotted. The ceramic mug we hadn't washed. A speck of gold light still clinging to the edges of the window pane, even though it was dusk now. It wasn't love. It wasn't even longing. It was a pull, a current that didn't ask questions, only answered the ones I never said aloud. I felt it when I brushed against the edge of the desk, the same way you feel memory when you hear an old song in someone else's car. It isn't yours, but it still stops your breath. He moved slightly, the floor giving the gentlest creak beneath him. And I remembered how I once used to notice such things only in the middle of the night, when guilt didn't yet have a name but had already chosen a home. I should have turned around, should have walked out the way I came, but my feet felt quiet, too quiet to be ready for leaving. He offered no smile, no invitation, just space, and somehow that was more intimate than a whisper. We stayed like that, two people standing too still too long, in a room that didn't know whether to hold its breath or let it out. And when I finally looked at him, really looked, I didn't see a man waiting. I saw someone who wasn't going to stop me. And I didn't stop myself. Not that night. The morning didn't arrive. It settled quietly like dust on unspoken things. There was no sunlight, only the dull gray through the curtains, catching on the specks in the air like the night hadn't fully left us. He was already in the kitchen when I came down. The kettle had just started its low rumble, and the clink of a spoon in an empty mug echoed too clearly. I moved slower than usual, as if the floor itself might remember where I'd stood the night before. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing rehearsed, no plan for aftermath. Just the careful choreography of people trying not to collide, though everything inside already had. My fingers brushed the edge of the counter. His hand hovered near the sugar jar. We both paused, as if the room would crack under another shared object. The same mug, the one with the blue chip. I reached for it again, not because I wanted tea, but because routine had become refuge. It was warm, too warm, as if it still held something more than water. I sat. He sat. 2 chairs, one silence. The jazz from his speaker played softer than usual, almost inaudible beneath the sound of the rain outside. It was the same song. I recognized the rhythm before the melody. My body stiffened. He didn't flinch. There was a thought in my throat, caught like a seed. If I said it, it would grow into something I'd have to name. So I swallowed. He stirred his drink with a kind of devotion, like the cup might answer him back. I watched his wrist move. The sleeve of his shirt was still wrinkled, creased where fingers had pulled hours before. I wanted to ask, what now? But the question felt too young, too full of hope. So I asked nothing. Just let the clock tick in the corner like it was counting something only we could feel. The mirror above the sink caught us. Not fully, just slivers. My shoulder. His jawline. Two fragments that didn't touch but leaned closer than truth allowed. His phone buzzed once. Then again. He didn't reach for it. I almost stood. Almost. My legs shifted, my hands pressed into the chair. Then I stayed. Because leaving would have made it final. And I wasn't ready for endings. Not when the middle still echoed in the way we avoided each other's eyes. He finally looked up. Not at me. At the window. The rain had thickened, blurring everything beyond the glass. A perfect excuse not to see too much. I set the mug down. Its base left a damp ring on the table. Round, perfect, and fading slower than I expected. And when I finally walked to the door, I didn't touch the knob right away. I just stood there watching my reflection in the brass. Didn't look sorry. The studio smelled faintly of cedar again. Or maybe I only imagined it, wanted it. The window was open just enough for the curtains to flutter in slow rhythm, like a breath being held and released, held again. He hadn't arrived yet. But the lamp was on. That same golden one he'd always turned on first, even in daylight. It cast a gentle glow across the worn wood floor, softening the space like a whispered permission. I stood by the easel I used to borrow, fingers grazing the canvas edge that never quite became mine. I didn't paint that day. I didn't even sit. I just stood still, watching the dust shift in the light like suspended time. When the door clicked open, he didn't speak. Neither did I. He walked past me to the sink, to the cabinet, and took down two glasses. The ones without stems. I knew what he was offering. Not a drink. A truce. A moment. A repetition. But something in me changed. Not stronger, just quieter. I'm not here for the same reason, I said, voice barely louder than the rain tapping the rooftop. He paused, glass in hand, not yet filled. I know, he answered, like the truth was old news. And we were only now catching up to it. I turned to the mirror near the door. Not to see myself, but to look past through. His reflection stood behind mine, not close, but enough that the edges of our images blurred into one in the low light. The radio played faintly from the corner. A jazz number we both never named but always heard. Its melody moved slow, almost uncertain. I thought I left this behind. I whispered. You did, he said. But it didn't leave you. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. Like a cloth wrung dry, no longer hiding the stain but showing the shape of it clearly. I stepped toward the work table. The same towel, worn gray, frayed at the corners, rested there. He had folded it neatly as always. I ran my finger along its hem. There were no words, no gestures. Just that fabric. Still warm somehow. Still soft. I didn't need answers. Only space to let the feeling dissolve without force. When I finally looked at him, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the window, where the rain left thin trails down the glass, like something trying to return to its source but losing direction halfway. I thought of asking, if I stay, will it mean something different this time? But the question stayed where it belonged, in the breath just before being spoken. Instead, I reached for the other glass and filled it with water. Only water. We drank. Quietly. Apart but not separate. The towel stayed folded between us. Unmoved. It had rained the night before. Not hard. Just enough to leave the road slick and the kitchen windows fogged at the corners. I stood there with the towel in my hand, drying the same plate for the second time. It was quiet but not empty. The silence had shape now. It folded around me like a coat I hadn't meant to put on but somehow fit. I didn't see him for days. We didn't make plans not to meet. Life just pulled differently. But everything I touched seemed to remember him. The chair across from me at the diner. The jazz that floated faintly from the neighbor's stereo. Even the warmth of the cup in my hand lingered too long, like it had absorbed something I hadn't meant to spill. When we did cross paths again, it wasn't dramatic. No confession, no blame. Just a pause, a glance too long on a sidewalk neither of us had intended to take. He nodded once. I smiled with one side of my mouth. That was all. But it echoed. In the days after, I became a quiet archivist of almosts. The coat I didn't wear again, though it was warmer. The coffee shop I stopped going to. The hallway I walked a little faster through. All the things that might have brought me close to him again. I didn't avoid him. I just didn't seek what I couldn't hold with clean hands. And yet I couldn't unfeel it. That pause in his breath when he looked at me. The slight hesitation before he set down a glass, as if weighing something heavier than water. The reflection of him in the bakery window, blurred by steam, softened by distance, still reached me more than some hands ever had. There were nights I lay awake not because of guilt but because of clarity. I hadn't been taken. I had chosen. Not the act, not the moment, but the awareness of being seen, of letting go of the quiet woman I'd been sculpting for years. The one who said no before she felt. The one who waited until it was safe. That version of me had slipped. Not broken, just dissolved in the heat of something unspoken. I never told anyone. Not him. Not my husband. Not even myself out loud. But I carried it. In the way I made tea more slowly. In the way I stopped turning off the radio at night. In how I let the silence sit longer between sentences. We never crossed again. Maybe because it would have made it real. Or maybe because some things only live when they remain unnamed. But every so often I'd catch it. The way the sun hit the floor just so. Or the click of a lighter behind a closed door. And for a breath I was back in that room. Not because I missed it. But because it reminded me I had once chosen something for no one else but myself. And still some nights when everything else is asleep I hear that clock tick once. Then stop. I didn't stumble into that moment. I didn't get swept away by longing or confusion. I walked in fully aware, carrying every silence I had ever swallowed. I chose the pause. I chose the risk. I chose me without apology. No one handed me permission. I wrote it on the back of a receipt and folded it into my own pocket. I used to be the kind of woman who whispered her wants into her pillow, thinking quiet made it kinder. Who mistook waiting for virtue and vanishing for grace. But grace isn't shrinking. It's standing in the exact place your voice catches, and speaking anyway. We spend so much time apologizing for wanting more. What if the wrong thing wasn't the want but the silence that wrapped around it? My shift didn't come with thunder. Came in stillness. The day I stopped asking if I was allowed to feel full. If any part of this made you stop. If something in it felt like an echo from your own past. Then maybe leave a mark. Not for me but for the part of you that once stood still and needed someone else to move first. Quiet stories deserve to be heard too. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there is still holding their breath. I never told anyone about that afternoon. But someone else had seen. And maybe that's why he never came back.